taken out and everything.
Just go ahead and start.
They had it. Yeah.
Well, good morning, everybody.
Yes.
Good morning.
And lots of
See all of you here. I hope you saw my little email and I didn't create any consternation by not being at the early service, but we decided to come to the late service. We're going to talk some more about Absalom, even though we found out last week he's dead. We're going to talk a little bit more about him this morning and his last week.
Hey!
Yay!
Class is starting.
Morning.
Knock it off.
We're gonna...
I used to teach junior high. It's okay.
I don't know if any of you read William Faulkner, but he did write a book, and you might have thought about that as we started this study of Absalom, the book William Faulkner wrote, published in 1936. It takes place before, during, and after the war between the states. It's about three families in the American South. And then there was a movie made from another book called Oh Absalom, My Absalom. They gave the title of the film a different name, My Son, My Son. It was a 1940 film. I don't know if any of you seen that. I hadn't. I looked for it, but I can't find it on our thing. It starred Madeline Carroll and Lorraine Day. You remember those? Old movie. Chris, you're an old movie too.
No.
Aficionado. But you know Madeline Carroll?
Don't remember Madeline Carroll.
39 Steps. 39 Steps. You like that one? Alfred Hitchcock? That's Madeline Carroll. Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, anyway, that's a little bit about Absalom and from the non-biblical arena. Let's open with a word of prayer, and we'll see what chapters 19 and 20 are about this morning. Lord, thank you for the chance to be here this morning to study your word. Thank you for those that are so faithful and so loyal to be here and love to study your word. We thank you for the message that will be there for us. We know that you'll speak to each one of us today in the Sunday school lesson, the Bible material we read, and the service to follow. Bless us now in Christ's name. Amen. Chapter 19 starts, verse 1. It was told, behold, the king is weeping and mourning for Absalom. We talked about this a little last week. It's not an unnatural thing that he is mourning over the death of his son. We talked about that. We talked about suicide. We talked about a lot of things last week. But we're going to find out a little bit more about this mourning of David. Verse 2, so the victory that day was turned into mourning for all the people. When the people heard that day, the king is grieving for his son. And the people stole into the city that day like people steal who are ashamed when they flee in battle. And the king covered his face, and the king cried with a loud voice, oh, my son Absalom, oh, Absalom, my son, my son. We forget in verses that talk about the mourning and the death of Absalom, we forget that it was a great victory. And his people, his soldiers, his army did perform real well. And they are reacting to his mourning. You know how it is at your house. If, well, you know, the old mama ain't happy, nobody's happy. Well, if one of you and your family, even your children, you know, are mourning or grieving or hurting or sad, and it affects everyone. So it's affected the whole, all of the group now, all of David's men. I would say the whole kingdom, but the kingdom is sort of split right now. But all of these people are affected by David's grief. One of the commentators that I thought especially summed this up real well, his name's McLaren, and he says, David's grief was the fruit of his own sin. He had indulged his son. He had probably spared the rod in the boy's youth, and he certainly spared the sword when he murdered his brother. We talked about all that. His immorality, that's Absalom's, David's immorality made him ashamed to punish his children. When he let Absalom flaunt and swagger and live in luxury, he put no curbs on him. Remember we talked about him getting a chariot with 50 runners and taking off, raising Cain, and it ended in Absalom's death. But we talked about grief. We know about grief. It affects all of us differently. Many of you know that there are the stages of grief, you know, the wheel, and you go through the stages. And as the Stephen ministers, we've studied grief a lot in the grief wheel or cycle, learning what not to say and what to say and what you shouldn't say to people that are grieving and how to handle that. That's what this man McLaren was talking about. But let's do something now that good helpers wouldn't do. Let's do something now that you're Stephen ministers or someone that knows about grief wouldn't do. Let's talk about David's grief and decide amongst us here, without him knowing, without him listening, whether his grieving was really that bad. Was it really a bad thing? Was it a good thing? We wouldn't do this in real for grief, but you understand we're looking now at something that happened a long time ago. Was his grieving that bad?
I think it's a human, it's a human emotion, it's a human, you have to go through it, you have to work your way through it.
True enough. But what if it affects the other people? Think about your family maybe. I mean, what if it goes on and on?
Well, there's probably two sides to it, because David is grieving as a father, but as the king of the nation, he doesn't have that luxury, and he's very part of kingdom. That was a person that was led an insurrection, and now he's openly grieving for him, and that can contest his authority.
That's the point I believe this commentator and most of the others are making. There's, like David said, there's certainly nothing wrong with the grief. We said that enough and we know that. But in this case, he's really two people. He's got two hats. Christian mentioned it. He's the king, and he's in the midst of a rebellion. Now he's trying to end this rebellion, and he's also a father. How many of you mothers and fathers and husbands and wives and workers and employees have had to balance what was going on inside with what you had to do day to day? I mean, everybody's had that, or is going through that right now.
Isn't that what Joab's trying to say, suck it up?
Here you go, here you
Suck it
go.
up and
That's
get
right.
off that. You're-
That's right. The very next verse is starting in verse 5. A couple of weeks ago, I told you that my great-grandmother had said that in some time in our life, we all need a good cussing. She didn't mean cursing or ugly words. What she meant was at some time in our life, we all need a good behind chewing. You know what that term is there? You know, behind chewing, or being called on the carpet, or getting bawled out. That's what Mary meant. At one time or another in our life, we all need that. Just one second. Just one second. And David's going to get it now. And David just mentioned it. David's going to get that kind of a bawling out right now from Joab. And that's what starts in verse 5. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, before he gets bawled out, I don't know your people you studied, but it's kind of interesting. This isn't the first son David lost, but the first one he lost was the baby way back, the affair with Bathsheba. And he behaved entirely differently that time than this time. And I wonder what the difference is. At that time he was grieving because he knew the child was going to be taken from him. And remember, when the child died, all of his advisors were like, oh, what's he going to be like when he actually dies? He's going to be terrible. And David took a shower and put on clothes and sucked it up. But this time it's different. I'd wonder what would be the difference in those two grievings: maturity, immaturity,
Well,
age.
I don't know. Off the top of my head, I think that was that was more private. I mean, some people knew about it, but not many. It was kind of a concealed, that sort of thing. There wasn't a billboard that went up that David slept with someone that wasn't his wife and she could have a baby. It was sort of isolated, so maybe he could contain feelings that way. I don't know exactly. Margaret?
Well, he still loved Absalom, but there was that. It was a broken relationship. He didn't get a chance to mend. That would be very much adding into it.
Good point. Harry?
I'm not sure what relationship he's had with God at this particular time. That's the one part that's missing, and that's what we all think about, is that he didn't bring this to God. I'm not sure if he blamed God for this. Obviously, he blamed other people, and he didn't realize that it's easier to praise the neighbor's kids than himself. And that's that.
Well put. Let's read what Joab says in verse 5. Then Joab came into the house to the king and said, "You have today covered with shame the faces of all your servants who have this day saved your life and the lives of your sons and your daughters and the lives of your wives and your concubines, because you love those who hate you and hate those who love you." That may not be exactly true, but he's trying to make a point. We'll see that this is exceedingly brutal. I mean, Joab's really, really being ugly and brutal as he says this. For you have made it clear today to those commanders and servants, they are nothing to you. For today I know that if Absalom were alive and all of us were dead, you would be pleased. Pretty bad. Now therefore rise and go and speak kindly to your servants, for I swear by the Lord, if you do not go, not a man will stay with you this night, and this will be worse for you than all the evil that has come upon you from your youth until now. McLaren goes on after this, and he says that you can see there are parts of David's mourning that were not good, they were not good. His mourning has blinded him to the blessings that he's missing, the good things that have happened, the battle, the rebellion, Absalom's, leadership in the rebellion, all that. That Joab says that should have been foremost in his mind. And I think Joab's thinking what Christian was getting at. Yeah, you're a father, but you're a king also. And he's saying that you shouldn't lose your kingness, if that's a word, because of your fatherness. That's what Joab's telling him here. Something came to me. I looked around until I found this proverb. I don't know exactly what to tell you about it, put it in, but it made sense. Proverbs 3:27 says, do not hold good from those for whom it is due when it is in your power to do it. And that's what Joab's saying. You got to say something good to these guys that have done this for you today. You need to tell them that you appreciate and are thankful for what they have done. Don't withhold good from those. And it's funny thinking about Proverbs because some of those, majority of them maybe, I don't know if there's ever a list by proverb, that David's son wrote. And I'm wondering, reading some of these Proverbs, did David's son come to this wisdom thinking sometimes about what his father David had done? I don't know if he thought about this or if it had nothing to do with it. Well, Joab didn't know the stages of grief. He wasn't a Stephen minister, and he sure wasn't any mental health counselor. If you said this to the wrong person at the wrong time, it could be really horrible for them. It could really kill them. But Joab did it anyway. He went and gave him, what? I had a quote that I did read from one commentator that I liked a lot. It says, sorrow which sees none of the blue because of one cloud, however heavy and thunderous it might be, is sinful. And that's what Joab's point was here. This much sorrow, you're missing the blue, you're missing the good. You're concentrating on something else. Verse 8 says, and it gives us David's reaction. It doesn't say a lot, but it gives us enough to get the point, I think. Then the king arose. Joab said, if you don't do this today, I'll tell you what's going to happen. And it says, and the king arose and took his seat in the gate. Now that can be a physical description of him going to walk and sitting at a place, but it can also be a statement that he reassumed his duties as the king. He started acting like the commander or the king. So it could be both. And the commentators don't know exactly because it does mean, physical movement to the gate. And we talked about the gate before where the mayor or the governor or the king would sit and listen to the complaints and hear the problems of the people of the town or the county or wherever they live. So it's a double statement there. And all the people were told, behold, the king is sitting at the gate. People started saying, okay, the king is at the gate. He's doing what he's supposed to. He's reassuming his duties. The word got out, and all the people came before the king. So there's a little break in the story here, and I wanted to mention that David's not in Jerusalem now. He's in another town somewhere still on the other side of the river, probably this Mahanaim. And we don't know what is internally going on in David, but we talked a minute ago about how many of us have had to do two things at once. Go to work when you're feeling like, or you have a fight with the spouse or boss or something, and you have to either come home or you got to take us home to work. We know we do that, and maybe David's doing that. There's some old biblical advice that David might be following. That advice there. Fake it till you can make it. It's not really biblical, but David could be doing that. He could say, okay, get up, go to work, do my thing. I can feel bad I'm on time. Verse 8.5, or 8b, a little break in the story. Now Israel has fled every man to his own home. These next maybe 20 verses kind of get complicated, or they're kind of confusing there. I hope maybe you read it in another translation or read a commentary about it. It says, Israel had fled every man to his own home, and all the people were arguing throughout the tribes of Israel, saying, the king delivered us from the hand of our enemies and saved us from the hand of the Philistines, and now he has fled out of the land from Absalom. But Absalom, whom we anointed over us, is dead in battle. Now therefore, why do you say nothing about bringing the king back? The kingdom itself, these 10 tribes, these 12 tribes, are really, they're not on the same page now. Everything is strife and discontent, and all the tribes are looking at the other tribes, especially the 10 that went with one guy and the one tribe of Judah that went with somebody else. So they're all looking at each other. It's all disorganization, and everybody's blaming their neighbor, and they're laying the fault on different people on one tribe for another. And there's really, in these next couple of verses, there's 3 different factions that we'll see. There are the royalists, the ones who are sticking with the king, David, hail to the king, the royalists. And then there's the Absalom's followers, down with the king, we want to take over, those guys. And then there's a third set who are sort of indifferent. Maybe they're the ones that, don't really care that much about politics. It's, I got a big business, and whichever side's in control, I got to figure out how to make money. There's that third bunch that are sort of indifferent to the whole situation. They'll go either way. Who's ever in charge, will go away, or we'll go their way. Maybe like the Vichy government in France in World War II. David could have ridden back into Jerusalem when this was over. He's on the other side of the Jordan now. He could have got his guys that are with him. He could have ridden back into Jerusalem, swinging a sword like El Cid, and making everybody do what he said and saying, I'm back and things are going to change now. And new shit. He could have done all that, but he didn't. He's staying over there, and we're seeing the kingdom and these tribes talking to one another. Verse 9 tells us that some of them remember the good things David has done. Matthew Henry says, good services done to the public may be forgotten for a while, and when they are remembered again, men will come to their right minds. Maybe some of these people are coming to their right minds. They're saying, wait a minute, David did some good things for us. And it's hard, I'm not going to talk about it, but it's hard when you read this and we talk about it not to make associations with the current situation that's going on in the U.S. right now. So you may be thinking about it, I just want to say it because let's bring it out in the open, but we're not going to take sides. I don't care what you think or what you believe, or you don't care me. But can you apply this, what's going on in Samuel today, to America? I don't know. That's for you to decide. That's not something, that I'm going to stay with very long. Verse 11 says, and King David sent this message to Zadok and Abiathar, the priests. Remember them? They were on his side, switched over, kind of spy sort of deal. Say to the elders of Judah, why should you be the last to bring your king back to his house, when the word of all Israel has come to the king? See up in verse 8 when it says, now Israel and all the people, they're talking about the 10 tribes, And now he's talking to the tribe of Judah. David's from the tribe of Judah, and Judah went with Absalom. David's tribe is Judah, but they went to Absalom. So he's talking to Judah now. He says, why should you be the last ones to bring the king back? The other 10 tribes up in this verse are already talking about the good things that David had done, and let's get him back. Let's bring him back. Verse 12 says, you are my brothers, you're bone in my flesh. He swayed the hearts of all the men of Judah as one man, so they sent word to the king. Judah sent word to the king. King David's words swayed their hearts, and Judah said, return, both you and all your servants. So the king came back to the Jordan, and Judah came to Gilgal to meet the king and bring the king over to Jordan. So you see, he got his own tribe now to say, yeah, you're right, okay, and let's bring you back to Jerusalem. He waited to be invited back, and this was really smart. And I don't think it was so much a political move as, well, maybe it was a political move. I started to say something else. But it was a smart move, however you think he did it. And Harry, I don't know if he was in contact or praying about this or not. It doesn't tell us that now. But he did wait. And that long-awaited invitation did come from the 12, or from the other 10 tribes first, and now finally from Judah. And when he came back, when he got to the Jordan River, or the vicinity of it, there were people who came to meet him. These people now know that David's side has won, and they come to meet him. One of the people that meets him is Shimei, how do we say his name? Verses 16 through 23 tell us that he was one of the first ones to come to meet David as David returns in victory, or as the victor, and he comes asking forgiveness. Look at verse 19. And Shimei, he said to the king, let not my Lord hold me guilty, or remember how your servant did wrong on the day the Lord left Jerusalem. You remember the guy that was throwing rocks at him? That's this guy. When David was leaving, they're throwing rocks at him, and all the men saying, nah, get out of town, that kind of deal. This is him. He's asking forgiveness. Do not let the king take it to heart. It remains to be seen if it's going to take it to heart or not, as we read the story. For your servant knows that I have sinned. Therefore, behold, I have come this day, first of all the house of Joseph. That's a term for the other tribes. There's Judah, then there's the house of Joseph. So that's what that means, just for the other guys. I've come first from the house of Joseph to come down and meet my Lord the King. There's a verse in Matthew here that might apply. You know, the Old Testament does point to the New. Matthew 5:25 says, come to terms quickly with your accuser while you are going with him to court. The idea is before it gets too late and you got to go in front of a judge and jury, go to the person you wrong and see if you can work it out. That's what that verse means. And here we see Shimei doing that. I'm not telling you he's doing it for whatever reason, because he may have a couple of different reasons, but here he is. He's doing it. In verse 21, Abishai, one of David's faithful, loyal, mighty men, Abishai says, shall not Shimei be put to death for this because he cursed the Lord's anointed? All of David's men remember getting hit with dirt clods when they were riding out of town. And he says, let me kill him. Let me put him to death. But he doesn't care he's asking for forgiveness. He says, let's kill him. But David said, what have I to do with you, you son of Jeruah, that you should this day be an adversary to me? Shall anyone be put to death in Israel this day? Or do I not know that I am the king over Israel? He's asking sort of rhetorical questions. He's saying, what do I have to do with you? Which sounds sort of like something from the New Testament also. Get thee behind me, Satan, what I have to do with you, Peter, those kind of things. He says, I don't want to listen to you. Nobody's going to be killed today. I'm the king and I'm in charge. So maybe he has really snapped out of it. And the king says to Shimei, you shall not die. And he gave him his oath. So he promised him he would not die. Now, what do you think about David's actions here?
That's really astute, I would think. I mean,
Really what? Yes.
astute. I mean,
That's good.
to not kill anyone, to kind of reunite everyone.
Yeah. He's going to need all the friends he can get right now. The nation is really divided, much more than we can see just in these couple of verses. And it was confusing there, and I hope I cleared it up, but there were those that said no, and those that said yes, and those that said, okay, we will, and those that said we won't. So it was a whole big deal, and he needs all the friends he can get. So yeah, it was pretty smart. It was pretty smart. It doesn't say so, but do you think David forgave him?
Well, he advises later on for Solomon to execute him.
Ooh, yeah.
I think it says we
Yeah.
should move in a lot of ways. Because there's also this Abishai, that's Joab's brother, correct? So they'll say, hey, let's kill him.
I don't know. It could. He could be. He does get a pardon one way or the other, and he does get David's oath and his promise that he won't kill him. He doesn't say that if you misbehave, I won't call you into court or call you up, and jerk you up. I won't come and get you if you misbehave. But he does give him his oath now. He won't be killed. What do you call what David's doing there? Is there a word you can say? David is being
Merciful.
yeah, there you go, merciful. And mercy, what's the definition of mercy? Mercy is when we do not get what we deserve. And grace is when we do get what we don't deserve. You got it? So he doesn't get his head chopped off now from throwing dirt and rocks at David and his men when they were leaving. So David is merciful. One of the Beatitudes says, blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. And it also says, what Kent was talking about, blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the sons of God. So David is trying to make peace. He is trying to make peace, and he is merciful to this man right here. David?
Was that the punishment for throwing rocks and dirt? Did you get chopped off?
Talmud had anything, or the rabbi said anything about it. But
Or was it a flexible thing? I mean, it depended on the mood of the crowd and what was going on that day.
the way it was pointed out was he insulted the Lord's anointed. You know, he raised up hands against the Lord's anointed when he did this. So I think that's the inflection or infraction.
Yeah.
Inflection. Okay. David meets another person he needs to settle up with, and it's old Mephibosheth. Remember him? Mephibosheth, the old crippled boy?
Yeah.
Grandson of the former king and his best friend Jonathan's son that he adopted. Found him after about 18, 20 years, brought him back to the palace, brought him to the table, gave him all the land. Remember that Mephibosheth? Okay, now here's Mephibosheth. And what I want to say is, this is told to us in a way that it makes sense. David's trying to put the kingdom back together, the reconciliation. It's not told chronologically and geographically correct, because Mephibosheth is not out at the Jordan River now. We're just meeting people that David has to settle accounts with to get the kingdom back together. Mephibosheth is back in Jerusalem. He can't come out to the river. So it's really a little bit later, but it's all in the same vein. So I hope that clears it up. We're reviewing and reviewing and reviewing again. Back in talking about Mephibosheth, and when you talk about Mephibosheth, we remember Ziba. He was Saul's old servant or head of the servants that somehow when Saul was no longer the king and died, he took over some of Saul's lands, and David gave him back to Mephibosheth. Okay, we'll skip Ziba a little, but he's in that story and he will come up. Let's just talk about Mephibosheth for a minute, verse 24. And Mephibosheth, the son of Saul, I read in, you may know more about me, Dina, but in the Hebrew, the word son can mean son, it can mean grandson, it can mean first male cousin, it can mean a lot of different things. We know he was Saul's grandson here, not his son. Mephibosheth, the grandson, if you will, of Saul, came down to meet the king. He had neither taken care of his feet, the Septuagint says he has not cut his nails either, toenails, that is. He's not taken care of his feet, nor trimmed his beard, nor washed his clothes from the day David departed until the day he came back in safety. The commentaries tell me that that is a way of saying Mephibosheth has been in mourning since David got run off. That's what they say this means. Now, it could just mean since David wasn't around, he didn't have to dress up to come to the dinner table every time. He decided, like us, it's Saturday. I'm not going to take a shower. I got to take one Sunday morning. Sure, it could mean that, but the commentaries say it's a way of saying he was in mourning because of David being run out of town. You decide what you think there. Verse 25. When he came to Jerusalem, to meet the king said to him, "Why didn't you go with me? Why didn't you go with me?" And I wrote this, or I got this in a little easier translation because it made it easier for old Jim to understand. It's an easy to read version. Mephibosheth answered, "My lord and my king, my servant crippled me. Tricked me. I am crippled. So I said to my servant Ziba, go and saddle a donkey for me so I can go with the king. But my servant tricked me and said bad things about me. My lord and king, you are like an angel from God. Do whatever you think is right." And then back to the regular translation. "You could have killed all my grandfather's family, but you did not. Instead, you included me among the people who eat at your table. So I don't have any right to complain to the king about anything." Mephibosheth is striking while the iron is hot, like Shimei did. Here comes David first thing, and Mephibosheth lays it all out in front of him. I don't know about you, but as I read this, my head was kind of spinning, trying to remember who's got the land and who told who what, and what did Ziba tell David back then when they took the land away, and what did Mephibosheth say, and in a minute we're going to be, Ziba comes again. It's kind of hard to figure it all out. Verse 29 tells me a little bit more about it, though. Maybe it says, "And the king said to him, why speak any more of your affairs?" I was thinking as I read that, David saying, I can't hardly remember all of this stuff. I can't hardly remember what was told to me and what happened and where you were, and I don't have any evidence. And I remember Ziba, and don't speak any more of it. I've decided you and Ziba divide the land. He says, you and Ziba divide the land. Now listen to this. And Mephibosheth said to the king, "Oh, let him take it. since my lord the king has come safely home. Well, again, David puts no one to the sword. He doesn't kill anyone. He's not mad at Mephibosheth because he didn't leave after all the good things he did. He tells him a story here. He tells him, not a story, he tells him a tale here, and it could very well be exactly the truth. But I think David's tired of these two. He's coming back, and he's got a lot of political government work to do now, and he's tired of messing with these two. And he says, okay, I'll just split the land. All of a sudden it came to me. What does that remind you of? I said split enough times, you should have got a hint. What does that remind you of?
Maybe it's Solomon.
Yeah, and who was it that did that? Who did that? And who is he? You know, I didn't ever think about it. I didn't read anywhere, but when I got this, I started thinking, you know, Solomon did this. Do you suppose Solomon heard about or read about or was told about? I tell you the way your dad David handled it one time. He couldn't decide what to do. He just said, we'll divide it up. And then Mephibosheth comes and says, no, don't divide, just give it all to him. It's almost like that story where he says, I'll just cut the baby in half. And the real mother says, no, don't do it. Give it to this lady. Isn't that remarkable? I thought that was just a blast, really, when I thought about it. A real woohoo, Jim thought of that. God told me. I mean, I didn't read it anywhere, but I thought, that's David's son. And like the Proverbs I mentioned before, maybe some of these Proverbs that he wrote, some of the wisdom he asked God for that he got, yes. But maybe some of that came from stuff that he's learning from his dad, or that he has learned from stuff David's doing. I thought it was pretty neat anyway. And I skipped over 17 until we met Mephibosheth, but it says there that Ziba came down to the river too to meet David, and it does not say David talked to him. I think when David saw him, he said, like I just said, when he's in town now, Mephibosheth, he said, I'm not going to tell him I can't talk to him. And he wanted to talk to Mephibosheth maybe first. So we skipped over Ziba a little bit. Ziba was at the river. He was down there to try and make up with David. In verse 31 through 40, we meet Barzillai. I just keep saying Barzillai in my head because it's easier. We didn't dwell much on him last week, but he was one of the three men that brought provisions for David when they were run out of town. You know, David and his men left, and the three guys met him and said, or brought raisins and dates and wine and donkeys and all that stuff. Remember that? This was Barzillai. He was one of those guys, and David wants to reward him. You know, I read that verse a minute ago. What to say about you got to remember those that did good to you and thank them for it. Where was it? I can't find it now anyway. But he's going to reward Barzillai. He says, I remember what you did for me, and I want to do something good for you. But what does the old man tell him?
He's too old to go.
Yeah, he says, you know, I appreciate it.
And I have a witness.
Yeah, that's right. He said, I appreciate it, but I'm too old to go into Jerusalem, and I don't need to be feted and fatted and fed, and I appreciate it and all, but, you know, I want to stay here at home, you know, and be buried by my folks in the grave. And I read, I don't know who said it, probably Matthew Henry, a good man or a good woman does not want to be burdensome. We have all come across that with our parents, probably, you know, and sometimes they do it in ways that hurt our feelings too, but I think that's behind it all. We don't want to be a burden to anybody, most of us, especially when you get old, and that's what old Barzillai says here. But he does ask David for one thing. What does he ask David for? Yeah, say it loud, Dina.
Let my son take the reward.
Take care of my son. Now, just think for a minute. As we've been through this story of David, I keep saying fathers and sons, it could be mothers and daughters. How many times we come across this, will you take care of my son? Will you take care of my son? It keeps happening over and over and over again. In verse 38, the king said, Kim, I don't know what they called him, what his nickname was. Kim shall go over with me, and I will do for him whatever seems good to you, and all that you desire of me, I will do for you. David says, because of what you did for me, I'll do what you asked for your son. And that started a long time ago, didn't it? Jonathan to David, David with Mephibosheth, now this guy Barzillai with his son. David is very, he's real good about that, isn't he? The people who he remembers that he wants to be good to, He's good to them even if they're not around. He's good to their sons. He's good to his promise. He is a man of his word. Dina will probably answer this, but I was going to ask any of you A students, if you can tell me when we hear about Barzillai's son, Chimham, next. When we hear of him next, the next time we hear it. Dina, you know? When David is preparing to die and he's going to leave his kingdom to Solomon, he tells Solomon to take care of Shimei's son. John asked David to take care of his sons. David asked him to take care of his son. David's been trying to take care of his sons. This man asked David to take care of his sons. Now David asked his son to take care of this man's son that he left him to take care of. It just keeps going on. It just keeps going on, going on, going on. It's kind of this business of pay it forward, sort of, isn't it? If you can kind of go with me there, that's what I thought of anyway. During this pandemic, there's been lots of talk about that, lots of wonderful things that happen with this pay it forward thing. And it's like giving a favor ahead of time in the future, one father to another because of what someone's done for me. I really like it.
It was not Father and Son that Christ's last act on the cross.
John 19:26. You want to say it? No. You want to read? You got it? You know it? Want to read it? Yeah, that's exactly right. Thank you, JD. When Jesus therefore saw his mother and his disciples standing by whom he loved, he said unto his mother, Woman, behold thy son. And then he said to the disciple, Behold thy mother. And from that hour the disciple took her unto his own home. That's what I thought of when I read that. I went, this business of giving other people care of your children happened right to the end with Jesus on the cross. It's funny, the Old Testament just keeps reminding us of the New Testament. Verses 41 through 43 is more of that, you didn't do right. Yes, I did. No, I didn't. I did it first. No, you did it last. I should have been first. No, you should have been first. It's more that the children are bickering. The tribes are complaining one to another. Why did you get to escort David home? That's what the 12 tribes, or the 10 tribes say when they see Judah bringing him back. You left with Absalom. Why did you get to bring him back? They said, because he's from our tribe. We're bone of the bone, flesh of the flesh. They said, oh yeah, well you went with Absalom. You shouldn't have been able to bring him back first. You should be last if anyone. Oh yes, we should. No, we shouldn't. Yes, you should. That's what all this is. They said, we're bigger than you. We're 10 times bigger than you because they're 10 tribes and they're only one. Yeah, but we're related to him and you're not. That's how this was, 41 through 43. It's going to take somebody with God on their side to straighten this mess out. David's just not going to be able to do it by saying, I'm a shrewd politician. He's going to need God with him to straighten this mess out. Chapter 20. You know, we talk a lot about what these words mean and what the Hebrew means and the Greek and the Septuagint and all that. But sometimes the Bible's real clear. We don't have to debate the status of this fellow. It says, now there happened to be a worthless man. Well, the Bible says he's worthless, so we don't need to go any further. And his name was Sheba. It says who his dad was, and he was a Benjamite. Remember Saul was from the tribe of Benjamin. David from the tribe of Judah. So we got this tribal thing. I don't know if any of you have seen Lawrence of Arabia lately. If you haven't, please get it. Even if you got a rent for that $2.99. It shows you exactly the feelings of each one of these tribes to one another. And they're all the same, this tribal thing. Here's a tribal thing. There happened to be a worthless man, and he blew the trumpet and said, we have no portion in David. We have no inheritance in the son of Jesse. Every man to his tent, O Israel. You know, I mentioned back in 1910, there were 3 factions in Israel right now. And here's another example. This man is not a royalist. You know, God save the king. He's not indifferent because he's going out in public. You know, he's got the loudspeaker going through town like Barney did when he's running for office. He's blowing the trumpet. And that could mean he blew a trumpet, but it could mean he just made a big show. It's one of those things that could be either way. He's raising a ruckus, in other words. So we know he's not indifferent. He must be an Absalomist. I just made that word up. He must be on Absalom's side because he's blowing the trumpet saying, we don't want nothing to do with you, David. We don't want anything. I don't have anything to do with you. So verse 2 said, all the men of Israel withdrew from David and followed Sheba. Now they just almost got it straightened out after they called each other names and said all this about who gets to bring David back. But now it says, all the men of Israel withdrew from David and followed Sheba. But the men of Judah, they stayed with king. They followed their king steadfastly from Jordan to Jerusalem. It's this confusion in the tribes. There's no real war. There's no confederation now. There's no agreement on anything. Everybody's independent and everybody's jealous. And what happened earlier, there's a complete reversal of the tribes now. Judah, where the rebellion started up in Hebron with Absalom, is now on David's side. And the other guys now are listening to this Sheba saying, yeah, you know, you're right. Yeah, that's right. And they're going with him. In verses 4 through 13, there's another story about Joab murdering somebody. And I got to that and I thought, I'm trying to figure out what we have to point out, what we have to point for and all that. But hold on, Joab murders somebody else. What's new about that? It's like, the sun came up again this morning. Joab murdered somebody. Hold on. But it really is important. Not so much the details of it, but it's important that Joab murdered someone else, because it clears up to us what happens when David is dying. When David is dying, way over in 1 Kings, and David has some dying words about Joab. He has some dying words about Joab. Joab has continually been a thorn in David's side. And David believes now in these verses 4 through 13 that this trumpet-playing, rabble-rousing Sheba could be as much trouble as Absalom was. This could start the whole thing over again. And David says, we got to do something about that guy. Now, he passed over Mephibosheth, and he passed over Shimei, and he's done a lot of good things, but he says, this could be trouble. And evidently, a lot of Israelites were joining that side, joining his team, and he sends some men after him. And he sends Amasa, who was the general for Absalom. He tells him, I'm going to make you the commander of my forces, probably in another political move or a military move, because he's got most of the soldiers with him. He says, I'm going to make you a commander of my army, and you go too. But Amasa, he doesn't show up. He no-shows. So Joab, and I hope Joab knew, I think he will by what we see, Joab and the men go after this Sheba guy. They go after this Sheba. Verse 8 says, when they were at the great stone that is in Gibeon, Amasa came to meet them. He didn't show up on time, but he met them there. And you know how I am. I like these things. When I see it, I try and, this is probably something important, and I'll look it up and find, what is this great stone? Is it something that's still there? Is it important and all? And you'll laugh at what the commentary said. This great stone was probably some isolated rock that was well known in the neighborhood. So there you have it. I got off on the rabbit trail and I was shut down right away. It was a big rock, and why it says that I don't know. It's not a main thing and it's not a plain thing. But Jim was deviated for a minute by it. Now Joab was wearing a soldier's garment, and over it was a belt with a sword in its sheath fastened on his thigh, and it went forward as it fell out. And Joab said to Amasa, "Que paso? How's it going? Is it well with you?" And he took him by the beard with the right hand to kiss him, and he did not observe that the sword that was in Joab's other hand, and he struck him in the stomach with it, and spilled his entrails to the ground without striking a second blow, and he died. We don't know exactly what this means. It dropped. The sword dropped. Some people said the scabbard dropped, that the sword dropped. He had it rigged somehow, fixed somehow, so that when he went out to extend his hand to shake hands or to grab his beard to kiss him, kind of thing, that as he did it, the thing slipped right down and he gave him the sword with the other hand. It was murder. This is not a war. They're not a fight. They're not combatants. This was murder. Amasa was sent there. David said, "You go and help them figure out this Sheba deal." But Joab murders him again. This is about the third time? Abner? There was somebody else too he murdered, I think. Anyway, this is Joab murdering somebody else. And one of Joab's men shouts, "Hip, hip, hooray for Joab." And they take the body off the main road and they throw it off the side so nobody will see it. Okay. This is chapter 20. You know, ladies, when we talked about the resurrection, I emphasized, and rightly so, that Jesus' first appearance after his resurrection was to a woman. And we talked about what a great women's Bible study it is. The women in the Bible. I mean, of the subjects of the heroines, that was a great one. That's a great story. That's a real important one. And there's many, many, many others. And in the last part of 20, we have what I think is another really good women's Bible story. There are many in the Bible. It's hard to choose a favorite. When I think of this one, I always have to think of Kathy's favorite. One of Kathy's favorite. Her favorite, one of her favorite women Bible heroines is Jael. You remember her? Jael. She was the wife of Heber. At one time back yonder in Judges, chapter 4, the Israelites were fighting the Canaanites. And the Canaanite general's named Sisera or something like that. And they were getting whooped real bad. The Israelites were up top. And so he ran away. And he came upon this little tent of Jael and Heber. And he asked to be put up there and hide for a while and rest. And Jael put him in the tent, gave him some milk, laid him down for a nap, and then took a tent peg and drove it through his temple. That's one of my wife's favorite Bible heroines.
You haven't had a nap since.
That's what we read, we had Bible study, I was homeschooling, or the reading for the week and the month, well, that's what he grabbed onto. Well, he said it in the middle of this young Bible study, and the instructors had to get me, can you kind of back away? I'm like, I'm sorry, that's what he grabbed onto. He told them all what happened. They're like, really? That's in the Bible?
It is. It's really in the Bible. And now you know a little bit more about Kathy.
Don't close
And you also know a little bit more about why I am the way I am. There's another one here. That's just a kind of an intro. In this chapter 20, there's really a wonderful story for a women's Bible study. Our beginning in 14 is this unnamed woman of the town of Abel Beth Maach. The woman of Abel, or as I will call her in this story, the Able woman, because she is well able. She is well able. Joab and his army are chasing Sheba, the trumpet-playing rabble-rouser that David says is going to be trouble. And they chase him into this town of Abel. It's a nice, quiet town. It's evidently a historic town. And Joab's men discover he's holed up inside the walls. Now, these town people know they're in the middle of a rebellion, right? There's a war going on. We've been out. We don't get the paper today. We just know there's a war going on. And there's a whole bunch of army coming at us. They shut the gates. They close it. They're not going to let them come in. We don't know who they are. They close the gates. This guy is in there somehow. And I think the townspeople did what they should do. They closed up to protect themselves. And our able woman comes to the wall. Joab and his men start throwing dirt up against the wall to build it up so they can get over. They start tearing down bricks. They start pulling down stones. This is an old historic town. And our able woman comes up to the wall and she says, "Hey, what's going on down there? What are you guys doing? What are you tearing our walls down for? Let me speak to your leader." And so Joab comes forward. She says, "Are you Joab? You the leader?" He said, "Yes, I am." She said, "Are you listening?" Now that sounds familiar, doesn't it? She says, "Are you listening?" And he said, "Yes, I'm listening." She says, "Good, because people used to come to us for advice." That's what these verses say. People used to come to us. We're well known for giving good advice. Why are you trying to tear down our walls and destroy this peace-loving, historic Israelite town? And Jacob says, "Oh, far be it from me would do that. We don't want to do that. We're not trying to do that. We're chasing this escaped no-goodnik, and his name is Sheba, and he's holed up inside your town. King David sent us after him. We want him. Give him to us, and we're out of here." And so the able woman says, "You just wait one jiffy." And she goes down and says, "If a guy's like that in town, I'll find him." So she goes down and talks to the town people, the women of the town, I'm supposing. And she says, "Look, here's the situation. This is who they want here." So in just a minute, over the wall comes this guy's head, Sheba's head. Able woman took care of it. She went down and cut his head off, or she told somebody to. They threw it out. Joab's soldiers all drop their shovels. They take their boards away from the wall, and they're out of here. It's all over. The scene ends. So, ladies, I propose able woman to you as the subject of the next women's Bible study. I think she's well worth the time. There's an answer. There's a lesson there for us and for us men too. As we put our shirts on, straighten our collars, and shave, There's a good lesson there for us too. Chapter 20 ends with the roll call of David's cabinet. There's nothing in it to speak of. It just names these people and says who they are. Benaiah gets command of the foreign mercenaries. Joab is still the commander-in-chief of the forces because he killed Amasa, and he cannot be. Adorah becomes the secretary of labor, and Jehoshaphat is the registrar, and Shebab is the secretary, and Zadok and Abiathar end up keeping their jobs as high priest. And then it says David has a personal chaplain named Ira. I think that's a neat name for a personal chaplain, Ira the chaplain. So that's how the story ends. Now, go back just a bit, and I hear the horses up there. This seemed like a chapter in which there were not too many spiritual truths to take away from it, but I think there were. I think there are, and I hope I didn't humorously gloss over too many of them. But as I thought about things to take away from the chapter, I'm thinking about David, the rebellion. One thing that came to me, maybe because of current events, I don't know, the first thing that came to me is that it's a whole lot easier to start a war than it is to stop one. You know, the debate right now about let's get the boys out of Afghanistan. They've only been there 20 years, and the soldiers say, well, if we do, it'll fall, you know, bad goes with that. It's really easy to start a war, but in retrospect, it's hard to end one. And that's what David's trying to do now. He's trying to end this war, and it's not over yet. He's trying to end this war. The second thing I wrote down was, if superiors do something foolish, they shouldn't think it's strange or take it wrong if their inferiors or employees tell them about it, even if sometimes it's done too bluntly. And us, me and you, when we realize our faults, we need to fix it. Even if someone told it to us and pointed it out that we don't particularly like or appreciate or honor or respect, you know, anybody can point out that we've messed up, personally speaking. And that, of course, applies to moms and dads and husbands and wives and all kinds of people. And then the last one I wrote down is kind of the same as that, but people who work for us, people who do something good for us, people who are commanded by us, people who are employed by us, when they do something good, they deserve to be thanked for it. They deserve to be thanked. Sometimes it's just a word, and sometimes it's something in the paycheck at the end of the month, and sometimes it's a bag of cookies, but they deserve to be complimented. I think those are all biblical truths. I didn't get to where I looked up a verse to support each one of them, but I bet we can. Don't you think? I think we can justify each one of those. I don't think we're reaching out too far there.
I like to bring out, I mean, it is for women, but there's a time and place to come alongside man or mankind as God put it with Adam and Eve, to come alongside and complete. It doesn't have to be in a relationship, and that's just another example of how powerful an act can be, because that's what ended. That what could have become even worse. And we always need to be prepared. It's not always easy, but we have to be prayed up and listening that way, and be aware of our surroundings and not be afraid to speak out because we are women. You know, there's a time and place to be. True submission is not quiet. So that's a thing that was brought up in a big Bible study.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, and not just for women, but especially for women. I guess.
Not that I could have somebody's head cut off, but
Well,
yes, we shouldn't be afraid either.
figuratively speaking, I bet you cut JD's head off once or twice. Yes?
Well, I just want to point out that Amasa was not on his guard when he met Joab.
Yeah, he wasn't ready for it. You're right.
So I don't know if there's a lesson there or not. That tells me to be on guard even with someone that might trust.
See, that's the kind of stuff I would have missed that you got. You're right. I don't know that he knew everything David had promised him or believed it maybe, or Joab had heard it all, or he believed it, but Joab wasn't going to take any chances. And Amasa really misunderstanding this peaceful greeting that Joab was giving him was taken by surprise, and it cost him his life. Eric?
And back in 1980, I was listening for it, I think we might have skipped over it, but verse 13 there, when David told Amasa, he says there, may God deal with me, be it ever so severely, if from now on you are not the commander of my army in place of Joab.
Yeah.
So that was another reason for Joab
Yes.
to want Amasa out of there.
Yeah.
And I wonder then, well, Amasa is not the commander of your army, so is God going to deal with him severely?
Like I say, this is not over yet.
Yeah.
It's not over yet. There's another shoe to drop, or to fall, whatever you say. Would somebody like to close with a prayer? David, thank you.
I wanted to speak to you in the group. I learned as in my walk in my faith that it's important to affirm people, especially when they are helping people to move forward in their walk with Christ. And I wanted to thank Jim and Kathy for this winter. You know, they weren't able to take their migration south this year, and I know that was kind of tough, but Jim, the kind of Bible study that you teach has helped me grow as a Christian and has gotten me into this book where I never really have before. The in-depth conversations that we're having and the short, brief discussions we have on the street when we pick up your garbage has really encouraged me both as a Christian and my growth, my spiritual growth. So, and that's because you've taken the time to come here every Sunday and get this group together. So I would like to say the prayer today. And could we all bow our heads? Lord Jesus, we love you and we praise you and we thank you for this Bible class. We thank you for leading Jim and Kathy through this ministry. And Lord, we're thankful to be together again as a congregation. We're thankful to be in one room. And we're thankful for the medicine and the science out there that has helped our country get back to the routines that we're used to before, but we're getting back together with knowledge and understanding. But most of all, we're getting back together as Christian brothers and sisters. And Lord, we're thankful for this Bible study, and we're thankful for the words that we have been reading and learning in this beautiful book. In Jesus' holy name we pray. Amen. Thank you. Appreciate you.